All right, this next segment is going to be devoted to talking about important factors in working with clients who have undergone traumatic, stressful, crisis type situations. And this is going to be taking, again, a little bit of a different approach, not necessarily talking about rapport building and assessment and those sorts of things, but just a couple other things that the book talked about that I wanted to highlight a little bit deeper. We are going to talk just briefly on rapport building and highlight some of the things that I found to be effective in that rapport building process. You guys did a great job this week talking throughout our group discussion board about different elements of building that rapport as far as calmness, attending, nodding, nonverbal cues, those sorts of things, which is absolutely helpful in the rapport building process. But a couple other things that I wanted to just take note of was this presence of calmness that is your job, for lack of a better term, to exude. And the analogy kind of that I have for you guys in this is like a duck. When we're with a client who's undergoing a very stressful or crisis traumatic situation, our job is to appear like a duck. And if you were to watch a duck gliding along the river or a lake or anything like that, you would see something that's very calm, very serene. But if you were to basically take a camera and move it below and watch the duck underwater, what you would see is this duck paddling frantically to keep itself above water. So it's giving this appearance of calmness while underneath we might be kind of thinking about, all right, what do we need to do next? And I need to assess for this. But rather than imposing that franticness on our clients, our job is to appear calm. And one of the ways that we can do this really is by slowing things down. Oftentimes in a crisis situation, it's really, really fast paced. We got to get a ton of information. We need to know what's going on. We need to get them help and all of these sorts of things. And we tend to kind of almost embody that crisis ourselves. So when you're working with a person in that type of situation, what I've noticed myself is the value of slowing down. And for me, I do this in a very physical way. It might be that I actually start to relax a little bit and maybe get really intuitive, and I watch the pace of my language and I ask them to basically just mirror my behaviors by slowing things down, by being able to take it from this frantic level up here and slowing it down so that they're able to start to really process their emotions and their thoughts, rather than feeling like I need to meet them in that crisis and get all these things solved and become frantic myself. I like to slow it down. Another thing that we can do in working in these crisis situations is really to allow them space and time to talk. Now, a lot of times when you're in these moments, there's confusion on the client's end to wonder what they're supposed to be saying and talking about, wondering if they're making sense. And the important way that you can make sense of this to your client is that the things that they're saying doesn't have to make sense to us. Our job in that moment is not to decipher and interpret everything that they're saying, but rather giving them a safe and calm place to literally be able to verbally vomit or verbally vent and process through those things without having to wonder if the things that they're saying are making sense. So giving them that space to go, you know what, go ahead and just say whatever it is that you need to say is going to be very, very helpful for them. Also in that is making sure that you're non-judgmental. Whether it's an abusive situation where you are really furious at the person who's doing the abuse, or you're not necessarily agreeing with something that your identified client is saying, our job as therapists, whether it's in a crisis situation or any other situation, is to make sure that we're taking a very non-judgmental stance. So this is going to look like us being really aware of what's going on inside us as the therapist. That's that person of the therapist again. Making sure that even if the client is saying something that we don't totally agree with, or we might even have like a moral issue with, that we're checking ourselves and going, okay, this is this client's issue. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it, all of those sorts of things, but recognizing what's coming up for you and making sure that your response back to them is not based out of judgment or wanting to fix the situation or that they have to do it a certain way, but rather that calming presence and knowing that even though internally you might not agree with things or you might see things a different way, that's okay. It's not your job to judge them. Now, there's a couple other things that I like to talk about in terms of working with crisis clients, and that is the two concepts of hitting a roadblock and also the client who wants to remain stuck in their issues. When you reach a roadblock, one of the things that I have found is helpful in trauma therapy is just pausing the conversation and having the client tell their story. A lot of times when we're doing crisis therapy or trauma therapy, we are so interested in, building safety and building rapport and getting the assessment that sometimes that can actually overwhelm the client. And so sometimes what's even more therapeutic is just putting a pause in the conversation and saying, you know what, okay, I just really want to hear your story. Why don't you just tell me what's going on for you? And it is amazing the therapeutic benefits that something like that can happen. The final concept I wanted to kind of touch on was that thought of a client who's choosing to remain stuck in their circumstances. Now, I know that this can be really frustrating as a therapist to see a client who's in a really volatile situation and to know how to help them and to get them out of that, and they're just really unwilling to do anything to change that. I know that that's so incredibly frustrating. And so in that, a couple factors that you might want to consider just taking into consideration in order for you to really help yourself is recognizing that for a client, anything that is change related is scary. It's fearful. As dysfunctional as their life is, it's functional for them. They figured out some way in order to maintain some sort of status quo that works for them. So the thought of change, even in a really traumatic situation, is going to be very scary for them. The other thing is clients a lot of times when they're in those situations start to find their identity in that situation. They believe themselves to be a victim. They believe themselves to be helpless. They believe that it's actually impossible to change. And so when we're working with these clients, what we have to remember is we're asking them to shift their identity. And so again, that's a big change, and that's scary because the clients are processing through not only that crisis situation, but what's it going to look like to live life completely differently. And that's a big deal. And finally, when clients are unwilling to change, one of the things to address is, what are the benefits that they're receiving by staying in this place? What are the consequences, both positive and negative, if they were to change? Those are heavy things for a client to realize and something that you can take into consideration when you start to reach those roadblocks and to be able to go, okay, what is it here that I need to address next? What is the client scared of? What is the dysfunction that's functional for them, and how can I meet them in that?